the story of Lion King. We all know it, right?
That was nice.
So you understand. So when you saw Scar was pushing, Mufasa off the cliff.
Long live the king.
And then, he fell down into this entire, place where the wild beasts were running and he got trampled. But then this little Simba, right? And he understands and he decides to leave the place because of shame. Look at the fundamental aspects of human emotions.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again on AskHowAbout. I'm your host, Pranay J. Reddy. I took my time this time because I wanted to make a dramatic effect. Because today we're talking about stories and narratives. No, but it's true. We are talking about narratives and stories, why they're so important and how they influence us in our everyday lives. Let me start off with a little example. You know that advertisement you love so much? Guess what? You love it because it's a narrative. And they're selling you the narrative. They're not selling you the product. Shocking, isn't it? But more than that, narratives are really crucial in our everyday life. Because everything we see and do, it contributes to a narrative or is a narrative. And that's why we love stories. I mean, think about it. We love science fiction stories. We love our Marvel stories. But what do they all do? They show a narrative of how each character grows and how that affects the whole universe. It's same with us. Except we have to battle against the coronavirus and we are failing miserably. So, in this episode, we thought, let's take a step back and understand how these stories, these narratives around our lives help us understand or rather have a better understanding of ourselves. So to do all that, we brought in an expert. The expert we have on today is Dr. Payel Chattopadhyay Mukherjee. She is a literary analyst and an academic. Her research areas include cosmopolitanism, Indian nationalism, South Asian studies, and various other subjects. Her doctorate was in Humanities and Social Sciences from IIIT Gandhinagar. She has various publications and she's been invited to give lectures and seminars. She's currently a faculty member at SSH department and she's an Adjunct Professor at the Dept of English in University of Saskatchewan. That's a bit about our guest. Let's get on with the show. Dr. Payel, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really glad you took the time to be on our show.
Yeah, thank you, Pranay, for inviting. I think this is a wonderful thing that you are doing, and you're talking with so many people, getting their ideas on certain important concepts. I'm happy to join.
Well, ma'am, thank you for saying that. It means a lot, to be honest. And this year, let's take a step back and just look at this year in the sense, I think we are living in the moment, so we don't see the scope of this year. But for any person, maybe being born a few years later or the next generation, when they ask us what it was like to be in 2020, which will go down in history as one of those weird years, we'll tell some really crazy stories about this time. We'll be like, we survived the apocalypse.
Yeah, definitely. So pandemics and these kind of, difficult events that happen in our life actually condense as very important stories and incidents that we would like to keep telling. So that I remember during the Second World War, when my grandma was a little child, she still keeps telling me the noises of the Japanese bomber planes that she used to hear when they used to go down in their basement in Calcutta. So that particular incident, she doesn't really go back to the grand narrative of the Second World War. She goes back to the very experiential aspect of understanding, the kind of fear that generated in that generation, hearing those sound of the bomber flights. So pandemic also, the 2020, maybe after a few years, will go down in our memory lane as incidents and how we have, experienced this kind of a situation. If you go and look back, you will see that different kind of issues that the world have faced throughout have boiled down to not only historical facts and incidents, but very personal anecdotes, or the way we call the personal micro narratives
Right.
that add to our understanding and making sense of the world around us.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned those terms here, because I find that we are obsessed with stories, our movies, our TV shows, the books we read or write, or even the mythological stories that we are told as children, whether it be whatever religion you're a part of. We are obsessed in telling and hearing stories. We love them for some odd reason. But that extends to our real life as well. So I just want to ask you, like, why do you think we love stories so much?
Well, as Homo sapiens, I think we have this unique, I would say, this quality of understanding and creating stories. So as Stephen Jay Gould would say, we are not merely Homo sapiens, we're also Homo narrators. And I would probably go and add a little bit to it and say we're also Homo receptors. We receive those stories. So the stories are not something we only narrate. We would like to receive them, keep them, restore them, and probably again, somewhere remodel them and pass it to the next generation or to people around us. So, it's central to human existence, the art of storytelling. If you recollect and go to some ancient cave, you will find, what we know as cave paintings. Basically, what are they? They're one person showing hunting a bull or something like that, right? So that person has tried to narratively, the words do not matter there because there are no words, but through that painting, through that particular impression, he or she has tried to portray one event of his or her life. It's somehow that you want to continue. You don't want to keep it to only the temporal zone you are inhabiting. You want to make it go further, and stories are a great way to communicate. So it becomes very interesting, when within stories, we try to find patterns. Basically, there is a lot of information around us. In those kind of very informative world, we are trying to make some sense. Stories help us connect those dots, make sense in our own way. When we realize, understand, and pass it on in our own interpretation to people around us and to children and next generation.
Well, that brings up a great point, ma'am. The way we connect to the story, because I see that the stories which stand the test of time, either we connect to them emotionally or rather we connect to one of those main characters, right? So,
Yes.
what is that? Like, do we want to connect with somebody so much that we cling to a fictional or maybe even a non-fictional character for that matter?
Mhm. So stories have these. When we listen to a really good story, if we will be coming to this understanding of what is a good story. Now,
Yeah.
I do not believe that there is any such bad story or good story. It's just that how well you balance the facts or what kind of information you want to share, having the right kind of, also the emotion. We are very empathetic human beings, right? Human beings are known to be more empathetic. So we connect the story through the stories, and through the stories, emotions matter a lot. That emotional cloud is a very important thing. Now, if you look, for example, as kids, when we want to give them some kind of a value education, we make them read, fables,
Right.
Aesop fables, for example.
Yes.
So if you tell it directly, probably they won't register it. But if the story comes, for example, the story of the boy who used to lie about a tiger coming and eating his sheep.
Okay.
So there are different kinds of stories. So one day, actually, the tiger came and the villagers did not go and help him. So
Right.
these are very small stories, but these teach probably the idea that do not tell lie in regular situations all the time. So for the kids to register the value or the idea behind comes through the narrative, and the narrative becomes much stronger. So I heard it when I was a kid. I still remember the story. And we keep giving this kind of references, right? Now, there's another important thing, this is not limited to kids' storytelling or entertainment or imagination. the people who are operating bigger brands, like the commercial brands we are attached to, they also know very well it's more important to market the narrative than market the product. So basically, when you consume something, you are also consuming the narrative. You're just
Right.
not consuming the product, right?
Right.
So it becomes very important to understand how this art of creating a narrative and of delivering a narrative strategically helps you bond with it, remember it, and also kind of understand the essence of it. You might probably see the product changing a lot, but the narrative or the value of it remains somewhere in your mind entrenched.
I'm glad you mentioned that, we are being sold on narratives in commercial products, but we are also, that's the one which we cling on to. Because in all stories, you take away the drama, you take away the emotion, the narrative is what something we unconsciously like about. Because if the narrative isn't good, we don't like that story. So how would
Yes.
you define a narrative? Can we define a narrative?
Yes, we can define a narrative. A narrative is basically any kind of a story which is having connected events. So there is not randomly, the events are not randomly placed. There is a good connection to it. You can make a picture out of it. And it's very important because this sense of connection helps us make sense of the story. For example, just take the story of Lion King. We all know it, right?
Down the line.
So you understand. So when you saw Scar was pushing Mufasa off the cliff, and then he fell down into this entire place where the wild beasts were running, and he got trampled.
Right.
But then this little Simba, right, and he understands and he decides to leave the place because of shame. Look at the fundamental aspects of human emotions. These are so strong. If I go and tell you about a story written by Sophocles centuries ago, that is a story, say Oedipus, on about Oedipus the king. There also this amount of guilt, shame, and the kind of retribution that happens. Stories around very fundamental emotions, which we all can relate to. These are not things that it will happen to you, so it's uniquely yours. When I look at you, when I listen to your narrative, I also empathize with it. So we can empathize with a cartoon character like Simba.
Well, I
Okay.
love Simba, and I love the
Yeah.
story in general. Like whether it be remake or the first one, that was my first ever movie I watched, and I was like, wow, this is pretty dang cool. And I
Yeah.
often forget, like now when I rewatch the movie, I realize, oh, it's a very emotional movie. Back then, it was just fun when I was like 5, 6 years old. But
Yeah. So
yeah,
it brings those recurring emotions, right? You just see the same thing in all the stories which connect to us the most. We see these patterns are recurring.
right,
Whether you want to go and look at the epics, be it Iliad or Odyssey here, Ramayana or Mahabharata, these are stories. These are basically narratives that have been originally oral in nature. Okay, so they were not written, they were not narrated, and people listened to the narration and they kept adding their bits and pieces to it. So,
right, right,
and they have a lot of regional flavor now. It's
right.
very interesting to see how this very important narratives become central to our life. Look at the things happening around. The idea of narrative is so strong, okay, be it religion, be it politics, be it any kind of social event, be it a kind of a historical social event, political event like our freedom movement. Everywhere you will find that the directive force is an effective narrative. If the narrative is not something that people can connect to, you will fizzle out. That's the core, the backbone of it.
I'm glad you mentioned that because narratives, I personally believe, aren't the right way to judge anybody in terms of real life aspects because you cannot, at least this is how I view it, like you cannot comprehend that person's whole narrative. You just see snapshots or, here and there views of them. In stories, that's different because it's condensed only for so long. So you can see that, but for a living guy or a girl, their narratives extend every day till they live
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we can only see the few hours we see them. So how can we actually comprehend that whole scope of narrative, or do we do it in a different way?
So there are different ways to look at it. One is a grand narrative. A
Okay.
grand narrative, gives you an overall picture. It gives you kind of a vision. Okay, it's very macro in its scale, as you can understand from the term grand.
Right.
For example, when I talk of, say, Indian nationalist movement or Indian independence movement, you can you can sort of understand that it is a huge event. Probably it will come to your mind when you read about certain figures, certain ways in which the struggle happened, milestone movements, okay, and typical figures that come to our mind when we talk about it. But then, these are very fact driven. Okay. But then there comes those kind of very small little narratives which are within that. I will refer to one thing I saw. For example, very recently we celebrated Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, right?
Right.
And so we also celebrated 150th year of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. So uh, and I was looking at Satyagraha, the concept, the idea. It was very philosophical in its way, and the events that have happened. But then I came across a movie by a short movie, a 10-minute movie by um, somebody called Kaushal Ojha. Okay. And that person has told about, one woman in some village in Morbi, Gujarat, uh, understanding or showing you the real way of, implementing, experiencing satyagraha, the practicing satyagraha through her own life. She's a widow who has just lost her son, but knows who is the person who is the murderer. Okay. But she still wants to understand the principle of calming herself down, controlling herself, and where you hear that Mahatma Gandhi's entire, the procession basically is moving. She was preparing food to give to Gandhiji and to other people. But then she manages to give the food. But while Vaishno Janato, the song is going and people are singing the song while they're moving, Gandhiji is not shown. She in her home is practicing it. So this is a micro narrative. It's a very small event, a personal event, but it gives you an idea of how to understand Satyagraha through action. Action from a person who is not so influential, will never be remembered in history. But there are many, 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 many stories, many, many people like that who have contributed to this grand narrative. Otherwise, any kind of a big movement is not possible if smaller contributions are not made, smaller stories are not being formed. So this is a story that was shown as a movie. So we know it, right? Now we can see it. But there are many, many stories. So if you look, some of the unsaid stories are the best narratives.
Okay.
They do not speak out. So there is a very interesting thing that in John Keats is a very famous romantic poet, and he has a poem written about the Grecian urn, and he says that there is a picture of a lover chasing her girl, but the chase is never complete. The chase is depicted on the vase, right? So forever the lover is going to chase, forever the lady is going to be young, and this is the story. You do not know what is going to happen. So there's an enigma around it, whether the chase is going to be fulfilled, whether she is going to accept, not accept, reciprocated, non-reciprocated. You do not know. But whenever you look at that jar, that story speaks to you, and it's a very minute story. It's a depiction. But you make your own stories as well. Okay, so micro narratives are when you understand your place, your position, your mindset within the grand narrative, and you aspire to something. We like to make our own stories or keep our own stories because we want to fit in somewhere. Our aspirations matter, our memories matter, our way of connections, making connections matter, and then we can talk about it. We experience, we sort of the way we make tea, after the tea leaves are basically thrown away, we just take that essence. The stories they help us to understand the essence, and it's very important to understand how narratives can be crucial in even helping you shape up your identity.
Wow, that was so. Let me see if I can summarize this in the right way. Like, so micro narratives are those unsaid little stories which contribute to the grand overall narrative, which we as people from the outside see. Now, micro
Yeah,
narratives
they're
could
not
be
always unsaid. You can also narrate them. They are smaller bits of
just
stories.
smaller parts of it, is what you're saying. So, but we can see them, we may not, but they're crucial to contribute to that grand narrative. So, we, in essence, could be a macro narrative to somebody else's grand narrative. So, it's like saying we have to do our part not to contribute to the greater good. Is that a way to put it?
Uh, micro narratives basically are those personal touches to the entire grand narrative.
Okay.
And the way we understand is, I'll give you another example. We know about the understanding of Buddhism, for example. Okay, but there is this beautiful poem by Tagore which is about a Buddhist monk called Upagupta and a courtesan called Basavdatta. Okay, now there was a time when she was very beautiful and she wanted to invite that monk to her house, and the monk said, I will come when you really need me.
Okay.
Then Basavdatta suffers from I think smallpox, and she's thrown out of the city gates. At that point of time she meets Upagupta. Upagupta comes and says, this is the right time for me to come to you. Okay, this is, so just remember, you do not have to remember anything about Buddhism, any idea of Buddhism, any philosophy of Buddhism. What you remember is that act of kindness that Upagupta shows towards Basavdatta, accepting her in her worst form. She's no longer beautiful, she's no longer cherished, she's thrown out. But then also she has that beautiful companionship with Upagupta. How would you define this kind of a relationship? Okay, so all this, but this, look at the narrative. It moves from the point when she's trying to seduce him. Here he's a monk who is trying to resist, trying to even change her, but tells her that there will be a time when she might need, and that is the time that he would come. So when we listen to stories, what happens, we kind of relate to them. Whether
Right.
it is in some kind of a brand advertisement, or whether it is some kind of a story that you want to communicate of your own personal life to somebody, we want people to understand our point of view, make connection with us, and we would love to share a slice which we think is important.
Well,
So
I'm
there
glad you
comes,
mentioned.
the personal micro. Sorry, yeah, go on.
No. Please, finish that statement. You're saying so that person's micro narratives. Please go on.
So there, you would understand not the entirety of the grand narrative, be it, say, a national movement or a very important philosophical concept, but you understand how that was, experienced by a person, and how that person has brought in some very important connections to that particular idea. And you remember those connections as a narrative. You do not probably need to remember anymore the grand narrative. Of course you can,
Okay.
but you probably get hooked to the story more importantly than the philosophy, than the idea.
Right. So it's like those little digestible things which we can, see through instead of the whole arc. So that makes a lot of sense. But I see that now, since you've been constantly mentioning how narratives and macro narratives are being used in advertisements and marketing, which I believe it's true. If it's a good advertisement, it'll hook you. The only way it can hook you is if it makes you feel, if it makes you connect with them. So
Yeah.
let's take, for example, let's take a brand like Apple. Now, whether or not you like their products or not, you can never disagree that the advertisements are, they are definitely top class, top shelf. They're pretty good. So
Yeah.
what do you see? Like, how do they sell narratives?
So I remember this ad by Google. Though Google really doesn't need any more recognition or any kind of more, people know Google like anything. Even the most lame person says, just Google it up.
Just
Right?
go, yeah, right.
But look at how Google tried to, bring in this concept of partition to its narrative, to its brand image, basically. There was this beautiful partition, sort of ad based on partition, in which two friends who used to spend time together get separated years, during the partition, and years later their grandchildren, made them connect. And that was very emotional because the grandfathers constantly remembered each other. They wanted to, so through Google search, basically you reached the kind of things. You spotted the shop in Karachi, Pakistan. You sort of got the connections, happened. The two friends met each other. So this kind of a thing, when you look at that ad, what it is trying to convey, do anywhere in your mind, Google remains, right?
Right.
It brings people together.
Right.
It brings the connections happen. Whatever you want, you can do if you have Google.
Right. Right.
Right? But it is not told on your face. That doesn't tell use Google and you will get whatever you want. It shows how two very impossible, impossible situations, like two people across the border comes together years later using the basic search engine. I mean, this was amazing. The Bisleri ad where people use the two camels. You have seen it, right?
Right.
Yeah. The mother camel and the child camel. I found it, if you look at it, it's humorous, hilarious.
Yeah. Today.
But a mother and child relationship basically is about trust. So the mother can trust the child to have the Bisleri water. So what they're exploiting is the trust and the purity of the product. But they're never telling you, go and drink Bisleri water. They're showing you through the narrative.
That's an interesting concept because, a lot of people still think if it's an advertisement, you need to show what it does, which I do agree. You need to show what the product is and does. But the way to connect is to not directly sell it to a person. And when I see the words buy this, I'm not going to buy this. You should say why I should buy this. And that, I think, is what narratives do, because they connect with us on an emotional level, like you said. And what I love about advertisements, and if you can see my previous videos, I always said I love advertisements. Within 15 seconds, they show that narrative and they somehow connect.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you this as well. So is this a form of micro-narrative or just a narrative? How would you define this as?
If you look at some of the very effective ads that have been made, they have a very personal touch to it. Okay, they do operationalize on this idea of the micro narrative because it's very action oriented. It has and advertisements have a goal in front of them. They have to sell you the idea. Okay, narratives are one of the ways to sell you the idea. The products are default. If you get that particular idea, you will probably consume that particular product, because the product, the idea complements the product, and the narrative is something that contains both of them. It's very, very important to give that narrative cushion to it, so that you might forget, but you do not forget that how beautiful some of the things are. Like, when I was young, there was this little boy about, I think it was a oil, I have forgotten the brand. But I remember it was about a cooking oil, because that innocence of the child and was throughout portrayed. Okay, it's very important for us to remember, Pranay, that whatever we do, we want to reach a bigger picture. We want to understand and connect to the philosophy. But as human beings, we would be very, I would say, connected, and we use the narrative as a way of transferring, communicating, and also understanding our own position and emotions within a larger picture. And it becomes very, very important. Today, personalizing your narratives have become a very important aspect. Look at social media. What does it do? Yeah. So you are sharing your day. You're sharing a narrative. You are sharing your life, your pictures, your photographs. These are very important aspects to help you communicate your story to the world. Previously, it was only limited to, say, some people who were photographed, whose stories came out. But with social media, you are now privileged to share your own voice in your own way. You are having the ownership of it. Do not depend on somebody else. For example, look at you, Pranay. You are trying to make your own story of yourself. Okay.
Yeah,
You reach out to people. Yeah, ask them different questions, give them a narrative to talk, whatever the narrative may be. Today I'm talking of narrative per se. Somebody talks of a virus, somebody, but then you are creating that particular position. So how would you like to identify yourself? You would be creating a narrative for that. Okay. It's very important that we are taking those steps, and social media, YouTube, Twitter, we are voicing our opinion, showing our narratives, showcasing a part of our life as a narrative, and enjoying whatever banter, criticism, love, likes, whatever it comes our way. But we are being expressive. Human beings, the fundamental aspect of narrative is to express. As human beings, we love to express. We will love to continue through the expression, whether we want to make an impression which is long time or an impression that is temporal, but we love making that dent in that cloud of time. So it's very important that narratives are and will always be. Today I'm theorizing more about it, or philosophizing about it, or romanticizing the concept of narrative. Whatever I'm doing, I'm keeping very general, because I'm not getting into any theory, or I'm getting into any particular nuanced conceptualization, because this is not the point of this interview. What I wanted to bring out is that we have to be cognizant of the fact. And this will also help us controlling some of the very important social evils. Today also we see these kind of concepts happening, and these kind of problems happening, like people getting murdered, women getting murdered for dowry, girl child being killed. These kind of concepts like female infanticide and all that can only be tackled at a grassroots level, I feel, if we can create and help them understand the situation, not by rules or dictums, but through very important personal touches and micro narratives on a very grassroots level, through different kind of social workers that we have in our societies. So problems cannot only be tackled through implementing the laws, which are like, they are a very top down process. We need to go branch out much deeper to make them happen in our societies. I'll tell you a funny story. Durga Puja is coming, and I saw that there was a picture in which the Durga, Ma Durga's, the Asur, the demon, has changed into a virus.
What?
Okay. So she and her entire entourage is fighting the virus with her weapons. So now the virus has horns. It is the coronavirus.
Right.
Just look at the fundamental structure. So you fight the enemy, right? An enemy which is within yourself as well. In many forms, we all have some of our problems. But you also fight social enemies. You fight a lot of psychological issues. But you're fighting. That is the spirit that we celebrate in Durga Puja, bottom line. So she is now fighting the virus. It's a depiction. And it was hilarious, but it was very meaningful, and it shows the power of the narrative. You place it in any situation. Today it's coronavirus, tomorrow it's a flood, then the next day it's an earthquake. Whatever it is, that spirit of fighting and never to give up will continue. So narrative, is the most important way to communicate it. How else would you communicate?
Right.
So I think, yeah.
No, I think that's actually pretty funny, but it also makes total sense. It's like that is the common enemy which we have to fight against, And
Yes.
I love how we beautifully put it all together in the sense like you start off with narratives in stories, then we start off with narratives in real life, how they use advertisements, and you talked about how these are needed and they're sort of internal reflections of our own narratives. So anything we connect with, or rather we like, it's because we want to be part of that. We have those emotions and we want to express that. So I think that was really beautifully put, ma'am, in the sense of any stories or narratives we like or want to be a part of, that's something we actually want to be in real life. So if you like horror movies, well, then you have some serious issues, people.
Yeah, but horror movies is the projection of our inner fears that we have, in a way.
Yeah.
Fear is also another very important emotion, and fear is an emotion that we cash on every day. Every day.
Right.
Look at the government policies. You do not wear a mask, you will be fined 1,000 rupees. Fear of being fined.
But I'll argue that you should wear a fine, not for the. You should wear a
No,
mask,
but
not for
what
the
I'm trying to say is fear is there in every way. Even the story of fear is very important. Narrative of fear. Our religion has this.
Yes,
For
yes.
example, if you do not do this, this is
And this
what
is
might
what
be
I-
for.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, I think
This is, of course, the intention to keep the social norms functioning.
Right.
But fear again is a very important aspect. Fear itself can become a topic of your session someday. How fear is exploited.
No, because
And how
fear I see that. Yeah, because fear I see that it's one of our more primal instincts. It's our most conserved in terms of evolution. It's most conserved emotion. You can trace it back to the earliest of animals. They all fear something. It drives us. So yeah, it definitely is in my mind. But for today though, the narrative really, it's a wonderful narrative. If you take a look at this episode, the way it connected from the start till now, it's a wonderful narrative, picking up everywhere we go. So I'd really like to thank you for that, man. Thank you for taking the time to do this with us. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you,
What a
Pranay.
narrative.
Yeah. So it was really nice talking to you. I think with all the disparate pieces around, there was some kind of a sense, I hope. But thank you for giving the opportunity. It was very nice interacting with you, Pranay. All the best for all your endeavors, and I wish you great success.
Well, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure talking to you as well, man. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that concludes the interview. And if you watch this video, it was a very well constructed narrative. I'm not just saying that because I was part of it, but it really was. And I hope you saw how deep and crucial narratives are in your lives, whether it be big narratives, the grand arcing narratives, or even micro narratives. All of them play in your lives right now. If you only take a step back, you'd see them all circulating through media, or even through watching me, or even with your friends and families. Where do you think gossip comes from? Those are narratives. And I also hope you saw that this is a field where it's fun to study about them and also to truly understand how people operate and why they do what they do. So by watching this video, I hope you understood that. And I also hope you saw what narratives do to us and how they are crucial in all of our lives. So if you did like the video, do like, share and subscribe. And if you did not like the video, well then I'll assume that you did not like the narrative, which is so not true. So do like, share and subscribe. Thank you so much.